Today we continue with our reading of What is Libertarianism? An Introduction to the Philosophy of Liberty, as written by Pietro Angeli, Victorian Policy Director of the Libertarian Party of Victoria in Australia, and read by me, Carri C. of the Bitcoin People podcast. So far, we've covered the first 7 chapters of this booklet, and you can find links to them below. Chapter 1, what is libertarianism? 2, what is the state? 3, what is the free market? 4, what are rights? 5, what is money? 6, what is taxation? 7, what are central banks? And today, Chapter 8, we move on to what is freedom of speech. Chapter 8, what is freedom of speech? Thus far, the rights to life, liberty and property outlined in the non-aggression principle and the harm principle. The primary focus has been the idea that libertarians support the right for people to have their property unviolated by others and the state. The right to life is fairly obvious. Do not kill. The right to liberty could use some elaboration, though. Freedom of speech falls under the right to liberty, as it implies that one has the freedom to say whatever they want without fear of persecution by the state. The basic principle behind the idea of freedom of speech is an inherently libertarian insight. The principle implies that it is wrong for a state to ban an opinion, because over the course of history, many times the prevailing mainstream opinion has been a reprehensible and harmful one. What did the fascists of Nazi Germany, the communists of Soviet Russia, the warmongers of the US since the early 2000s, and modern-day authoritarian progressives all have in common? All of these are examples where the state's imposed opinion and mandate was immoral, unjust, provably harmful, and yet dissent at the time was banned or censored. The importance of freedom of speech hinges precisely on the ability to say offensive and controversial things, for the state will always make the truth controversial if it wants to obscure it. Quote George Orwell, "In a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act." An argument often made against freedom of speech is that you may have the right to free speech, but you don't have the right to offend. This is patently false. You have the right to liberty, and therefore you have the right to live your life exactly as you see fit, as long as you don't bring physical harm against another person or their property. This also means that you have the right to voluntarily associate or not associate with whoever you want. If someone were to offend you, you are under no obligation to frequent that person, nor are you obliged to permit them onto your property. Quote Jordan Peterson, "In order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive." Part of the importance of freedom of speech hinges on the fact that you may risk offending someone. Part of the importance of freedom of speech is that heinous and hateful ideologies are permitted to be disseminated, not because it is desirable to have them grow, but because the risk of allowing the state to determine what is and what isn't allowed is far more dangerous. Quote from Ron Paul, "We don't have the freedom of speech to talk about the weather. We have the First Amendment so we can say some very controversial things." The importance of freedom of speech naturally extends to freedom of the press, and the vital role that journalistic curiosity plays in permitting a populace to be informed, sceptical, and critical of the actions of their government. More and more, the press around the world is becoming encompassed under the state's influence. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation, ABC, is a clear example of this. Despite the fact that a large portion of the public feel their views are not represented by the ABC continues to broadcast nationwide on television, radio, and online at the expense of the taxpayer. More and more libertarians are relying on independent media to access truthful information on current events, which doesn't have the advantage of being bankrolled indirectly by the government like the corporate press, or directly by the government like the ABC.